Thank you for joining the September 2025 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to interact with great speakers about content that will help them get the full benefit from their VMware software. Before we get into today's content, there are just a couple of announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on October 9th, and we'll have the privilege of being joined by Brock Peterson and Jared Burns to talk about VCF Operations Fleet Manager. Your interaction during this webinar is important, so please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. If we are unable to answer your question during the webinar, please be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. At the end of today's session, you'll be prompted to fill out a survey related to the value you received from this session and any topic suggestions for the future. Your completion of this survey is a valuable gift back to us, and we greatly appreciate it. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. That brings us to today's topic and speaker. Kyle is in the VCF division and is a subject matter expert on today's topic of upgrading to VCF9. Kyle, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. And welcome to the session. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to attend. So we will be talking about upgrading to VCF9. As mentioned, my name is Kyle Gleed. I'm part of the Cloud Foundation technical marketing team here at Broadcom. I've been working with Cloud Foundation for a number of years, going all the way back to 2016, 2017. So I've been working with it for a while, and currently focus primarily on upgrading and deploying. So I got the kind of backwards, but deploying, upgrading, building a private cloud with VMware Cloud Foundation. So as we go through, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A, and if I see some questions coming in, I'll try and answer some of those as they come in. But to get through the content, we may have to defer some of those towards the end. If you have specific situations or questions that we're not able to get to, feel free to reach out to your TAM and have your TAM reach out to us directly, and we're happy to help where we can. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. So when it comes to upgrading to VCF9, so we recognize that almost all of our customers are running either vSphere, some version of vSphere, and in that vSphere environment, they may or may not be running various other components such as ARIA operations and ARIA automation and things like that. And then we also have customers who are running VMware Cloud Foundation or VCF, be it 5.x version, and in a similar light, they may or may not be running other components like the ARIA suite. And it's important to, before you start down the path of upgrading, it's important to look at where you're at, the environment you want to upgrade, and what components are running. Because while the upgrade is very similar in all cases, the order in which you upgrade various components will change depending on the components that are deployed. So here I have a little flow chart. And so when you start, you're going to basically start by asking yourself, am I a vSphere customer or am I a VCF customer? And if you're a vSphere customer, are you running ARIA operations? And if you are running ARIA, if you're not running ARIA operations, then your upgrade path is pretty straightforward, because you'll start by, you'll upgrade your vSphere to vSphere 9, you'll deploy the VCF installer, which is a new component that we have that will make it very easy to stand up Cloud Foundation and instantiate your Cloud Foundation fleet. You'll then go in, and as part of this, the VCF installer will take care of the steps of deploying VCF operations and deploying the VCF fleet manager, which we're going to hear about next month. And then it's important to understand that when you upgrade from a previous version of vSphere to VCF 9.0, the licensing will revert to evaluation mode, and so you will need to relicense. And we have a new method for licensing with 9.0. Okay, now what if you already have an instance of ARIA operations running in your environment? Well, if you have an instance of ARIA operations, you need to first look and say, is that a standalone instance of ARIA operations, or is that an ARIA operations that's being managed by the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager? If you do not have the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager and it's a standalone instance of ARIA operations, then your upgrade path is going to go something like this. You're going to basically start by going in and upgrading the ARIA operations to VCF operations. And just a quick note here, I am referring to the pre-upgraded version as ARIA operations and the post-upgraded version as VCF operations. I recognize that we did change the name of this and the branding and stuff, but for purposes of the upgrade discussion, I find it helps just to refer to the pre-upgrade version as ARIA and the post-upgrade version as VCF. So hopefully the naming won't be too confusing. But you'll notice here where before we just went to the VCF installer and let the VCF installer take care of deploying the ARIA operations, the VCF operation. Here, because we already have the ARIA operations, we need to manually upgrade it first. So that's our first step. And then from there, we can go in, do our upgrade, download the installer. And the installer will recognize that, hey, you have an existing ARIA operations, you have an existing vCenter operations. We call that converging. We're going to take those existing components, bring them into the VCF fleet, and then we'll deploy the additional components such as the fleet management. And then when we're done, we'll license. So again, very similar upgrade path. The difference here being that because you have the ARIA operations, you'll need to perform that upgrade first and then go in and proceed with upgrading your environment. Okay, now what if you have the ARIA operations and it is being managed by the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager? So in this case, because you have the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager, you can use the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager to perform the upgrade of operations and to deploy the fleet management. So what happens is the order changes here slightly because now we're going to go in and we're going to first apply a patch to the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager, and then we're going to use that to upgrade our VCF operations. And as part of this upgrade, the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager will deploy the fleet management appliance. And then we proceed to do the upgrade, and you'll see it looks very similar from there. So that's kind of the vSphere upgrade path. We're going to go through this in a little bit more detail as we go through, and I'll show an example of this depending how much time we have on how much we'll be able to show. But we'll go through and see what that looks like. Now let's shift gears over here to what if you're a VCF customer? So while most customers are going to be in the vSphere category, we do have a number of customers who are running VCF. And you will need to be running VCF version 5.0 or above. And the upgrade path here, again, you're going to ask yourself the same set of questions. I'm running VCF, but do I have the ARIA operations deployed in my VCF environment? If I don't have it deployed, then I'm just going to go ahead and proceed with doing the upgrade of using the SDDC Manager. I start by upgrading the SDDC Manager itself, and then I will manually go in and deploy the VCF operations and the fleet management appliance. And if you go into the documentation, you'll see the steps are outlined there. You're going to download these OVAs, you're going to deploy them, you'll go through and do some configuration to register the operations with the fleet manager. And then you'll go in and manually deploy the operations collector and this is all kind of done, and then you'll relicense. There is a kind of a bit of a philosophical, I think that's the debate about the order here. You could, in this example, I'm showing upgrade SDDC Manager, upgrade the VCF first, and then deploy ops and fleet management. There are some people who would prefer to upgrade, to deploy the operations and the fleet management first, and then upgrade. And the issue here is around the need to relicense. Because you need to relicense when you're done, a lot of times it's recommended to deploy that VCF operations first and have that ready so that after your upgrade, you can relicense, as opposed to get the upgrade done and get to these bottom steps and then forget about them and then be scrambling to license. So just keep in mind, the order is not set in stone here. And if you go in the documentation, you might find it's a little bit different. But this is just kind of the high level sequence here. So if you have VCF, you're not currently running the VCF operations, you will need to manually deploy the operations together with fleet management, do some additional configuration in conjunction with the upgrades that will be run through the SDDC Manager. And again, you will need to relicense when you're done. Now, what if I have ARIA operations? Well, again, you have to ask yourself, is this ARIA operations standalone, or is it being managed by ARIA LCM? If it's a standalone, meaning there's no ARIA LCM, well, then you'll go in and follow a similar path to the vSphere side, where you first start by manually upgrading ARIA operations to VCF operations. And then you'll manually deploy the fleet management and do some configuration there. And then we'll go to the SDDC Manager, upgrade our VCF environment. And then we'll have to, after we upgrade the VCF environment, we'll come back and complete some of the configuration. The reason why we break the configuration here is because in order to register your vCenter server with the fleet manager, it has to be running version 9. So you don't get version 9 until after you complete your SDDC upgrade. So that's why you're deploying the components up here in the beginning. You upgrade ops, deploy fleet manager, you'll connect those two, you'll update the SDDC, the VCF instance, and then you go in, and now that you're running vCenter 9, you can basically add your vCenter as a deployment target and configure your configuration, deploy the collector, and license VCF. Now, if you are running the RALCM, then here again, you can use the RALCM to help you in your upgrade by first going in and applying a quick update, patch 2 or higher, to the RALCM, and then using that to upgrade operations, at which time it will deploy the fleet management. And this will take care of a lot of the manual steps that you'll see referenced in these other examples. And then once you've done that, you go ahead, upgrade your VCF instance with the SDC manager, the NSX, the vCenter, the ESX, and then deploy your collector and relicense your environment. So this is just a quick overview to kind of show, I believe that most customers are going to fall in one of these two camps. They're going to be a vSphere customer or a VCF customer. And you're going to basically need to understand, are you running ops, and is that ops managed by LCM? And how you answer those questions is going to affect your upgrade path. Now, at this point, you may be asking, what about things like ARIA automation or ARIA operations for networks or things like that? So those components, they are part of the private cloud, and they will need to be upgraded as well, but they will not affect your initial upgrade path, because essentially, take automation, for example. If you have ARIA automation, what would happen is after you're done with your upgrade, you would then log into the fleet management appliance, import that existing automation into fleet management, where you could then use fleet management to upgrade it. So those components do get upgraded. It's just that they're kind of done after the initial upgrade here. So I'm not covering them here on this slide. So there are a couple of questions here. Let me see if I can take those. There's one saying, do you need to relicense everything or just vSphere? You will need to relicense everything. Hopefully you're familiar with the new licensing approach with VCF9, but with VCF9, you now have a license file. And so there's this site called the VCF Business Services Console, where you connect, and you basically manage your licenses there. And one of the things you'll do is you'll carve out from your license entitlement a subset of those licenses, and you'll assign them to your VCF operations instance. And then that will create a license file that you download to VCF operations, and then you assign that license file to the vCenter server. There's one license file, and you assign it to the vCenter server, and you're done. And that takes care of licensing the vCenter, the vSAN, the NSX, the ESX. Everything's licensed by that one license file. So you no longer have separate license keys. You have a single license file, and there is support for both a connected and disconnected mode. So there's a new licensing approach, and as such, when you upgrade from the older versions, the vSphere 8.x and NSX 4.2, et cetera, to 9.0, the components will revert to the evaluation license, which is a 90-day evaluation period, during which you will have that 90 days to then register with operations and to relicense the environment. So yes, you are licensing everything to include vCenter, NSX, and if you have legacy systems running old versions, those continue to be licensed the same way as they have in the past. You'll continue to get license keys. You'll continue to manage those, license those components individually, separate license for vCenter, separate license for NSX, et cetera. Nothing changes with the older components. The need to relicense only happens to the upgraded components following the upgrade. So if you have other vSphere 8 environments running in your data center, you do not need to relicense those as part of your 9.0 upgrade until such time as you upgrade those components to 9.0, and then you will need to relicense those. So hopefully that helps. If you have two distinct ARIA operations instances managed by the same ARIA LCM. When we get into the demo, you'll see how if you have multiple environments, how it's done by an environment basis. So you would take the one environment, upgrade it, it will pull it out of RELCM and register it with the fleet manager, and the other environment will stay with the RELCM, and that old RELCM continues to run in your data center. We continue to use it to manage the non-upgraded components and until such time as you transition off of it. So that should work. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into a couple of examples here. So I did mention here. Let me see. I got some options down here. So when you do the deployment, one of the things with the VCF installer is with the VCF installer, you will have the option to deploy VCF automation if it's not already in your environment. And so you'll see that there. You can skip this and do this as a day two operation, but keep in mind that going forward with VCF 9.0, we have this concept of a VCF fleet, and the VCF fleet is comprised of VCF operations and VCF automation. So they are both required components in the VCF private cloud. As such, if you're not running it, the installer will expect to install it, but you can do this as part of the deployment, or you can do it as a day two operation, so you don't have to do it right away. As I mentioned, you can import an existing VCF automation as a day two activity as well as any other components like ARIA operations for networks. One note here is if you're using ARIA logs, there is not currently an upgrade path from ARIA logs to VCF logs. So what you would do is you keep the old version of ARIA logs that would continue to be managed by ARIA LCM, and you would deploy a new version of VCF logs that would be managed by the new fleet manager, and then you'd have to work out your transition to basically, gather the logs in the new VCF logs and then shut down the older logs over time as those logs age out. Okay. So as far as recommendations, recommended practices, so you'll always want to begin with the fleet components, the operations and operations fleet management, as we've seen in that flow chart. So whenever I talk to a customer, they say, "Hey, I'm looking to upgrade. Where do I start?" I start with those questions. Are you using ARIA operations today? And if so, is that ARIA operations managed by the ARIA LCM? As that will kind of lay out the high level upgrade path. And and if you're not using them, then we're going to deploy them. If you are using them, then you're going to start by upgrading those components to 9.0 and then go forward. Um, Whenever you're getting ready to do an upgrade, remember you're upgrading the VCF, the full stack. So you want to look at vSphere, make sure there's no alarms or alerts. You want to check your vSAN health. You want to check your NSX alarms. You want to basically make sure everything's healthy before attempting the upgrade. And will do pre-checks, and those pre-checks will report errors and warnings. Take those very seriously. If you have any warnings, you have any errors, make sure you do your due diligence and address those. If you try to ignore those, then chances are they're going to surface and it's going to cause you problems down the road. So always proactively, a week, a month, before you start the upgrade, go in and check those things. A lot of times we go into customers' environments, we see that they have some lingering alerts, alarms that have just either been silenced or been ignored for a while, and we forget about those. And then when we get into the upgrade, those things will bubble up, and suddenly we'll start to see I finally have to address this because I can't ignore it any longer. Keep in mind that when you do the upgrade, we are deploying additional components. So for customers who are not running ARIAS operations, ARIA Suite Lifecycle, we're going to deploy those components. We're going to deploy another component called the operations collector. We're going to deploy automation. We're going to deploy NSX. So you want to keep in mind these additional components will be coming in. And so the cluster that you are upgrading, that's going to be converted into your management domain in your new VCF fleet, does it have room for these new components? And do you need to go in and maybe free some capacity up by removing any unused VMs, any unneeded snapshots? And then also pay attention to passwords and certificates, particularly any expired passwords or expired certificates, and make sure you're not going to be in a situation where sometimes these upgrades can take a little bit of time. We do them over a couple of maintenance windows, and you don't want to be dealing with an issue where a password um, uh, expires or a certificate expires in the middle of the upgrade. So you can go in and you can kind of check those, make sure everything's good and valid before you begin. And also be aware that read the release notes. We have deprecated a couple of features. If you're not currently using the VLCM images, the vSphere Lifecycle Manager images to upgrade your environment, be aware that you will need to make that transition when you go to 9. The VUM, the vSphere Update Manager, or what was also referred to as VLCM baselines, is being deprecated. There are some kind of corner cases for this, but for the most part, you will need to make this transition to VLCM images. Take that into account. Nothing's more frustrating than to start a maintenance window, get to started, and then find out, oh, we missed this. We have to go in and transition to images. Now I have to go research how to do that. Also, keep in mind that ELM, Enhanced Link Mode, this is something configured by default in VCF, and it's also very popular for a lot of vSphere customers to use that single pane of glass. This is a deprecated feature. It is being removed from vCenter. It is being replaced with a new feature in VCF operations called vCenter Linking. And when you're getting ready to upgrade, if you have a vCenter that you're upgrading to a VCF fleet, today with VCF 9.0, you will need to remove that vCenter from the enhanced link mode ring. And so keep that in mind. Okay, so it looks like Amit's taking some of the questions. That's good. I'll just keep going on with the presentation. So what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to go through some scenarios here, just to kind of give you a high-level overview of what the upgrade experience will look like from just a high level. And again, I'm talking very high level. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail around things, some of the more complex use cases, such as, you have NSX Federation or things like that. So keep in mind, this is definitely not comprehensive of all the possible scenarios, but it should give you a good idea of the high level flow and what the upgrade experience will look like. So we're going to start with the vSphere 8 environment and going to VCF 9.0. And what are the upgrade paths here? So keep in mind that when we do an upgrade to VCF 9.0, you will need to manually upgrade vSphere to vSphere 9, and this includes both the vCenter and the ESX. So a lot of times I've talked to customers and they hear about the new VCF installer, and they go in with the expectation I'm going to use the VCF installer and it's going to upgrade my vCenter server and my ESX cluster, and that's actually not the case. As a prerequisite to using the VCF installer, you will need to first upgrade your vSphere environment to 9 and upgrade your ESX host to 9. As I mentioned, you will need to transition your ESX clusters to VLCM images, and keep in mind that you will need to have at least one vSphere distributed switch configured on those clusters. A VDS is a required component for vSphere 9 going forward. And then you'll want to verify that capacity for those new components, as I mentioned. And here's a quick summary of some of the components. You may have some of these, you may not, but for the most part, NSX will be deployed, VCF operations will be deployed, the VCF operation fleet manager will be deployed along with the collector, and VCF automation. And again, VCF automation kind of could put an asterisk there because it doesn't have to be deployed as initial deployment. It can be deployed as a day 2 operation, but these are the components that make up a VCF fleet. And so you'll want to make account for those. We do have different options for deploying several of these. When you go into the VCF installer, you'll see there's an option to do a simple deployment or a high availability deployment. Essentially what this is helping to either choose whether you're going to use a small footprint. You're going to deploy the NSX manager, the operations, the automation as single node appliances in order to reduce the footprint. Great for test dev, for labs. But then you can also deploy with the HA deployment model, where each of these components, the NSX, the operations, and the automation, are deployed as 3 node clusters with built-in high availability that improves a higher level of availability, along with additional capacity for scalability. So we have those some options there to, as well that you want to be aware of. Okay, upgrade considerations. So as we've already seen, the upgrade path will vary depending on the components that you have deployed. So again, and the 2 that we're primarily concerned with when it comes to upgrade is the operations and the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager. When you bring an existing vSphere environment in and you're going to what we call converge that into a VCF management domain, keep in mind the cluster where the vCenter server is running will become that default cluster in the VCF management domain. And so what is the significance of this default cluster? Well, that's the cluster where we're going to deploy these new components. So if you have, a vCenter server, it's got multiple clusters, you may be wondering, well, where is it going to deploy these components? Well, by default, it's going to deploy them in that default cluster, and that default cluster is going to be identified by wherever the vCenter server is running. Okay. And again, you will need to relicense after the upgrade, and keep in mind the new approach, and this is done from VCF operations. We used to have a slide here where we try and go through and talk about guardrails and limitations. And what we found through experience is that as we come out with new updates, these guardrails and limitations are constantly changing and evolving. So rather than list them here and have the slides get out of date, just point you to the documentation. So if you have questions about, hey, what's the minimum number of hosts I need if I'm using fiber channel? What's the minimum number of hosts I need if I'm doing a stretch cluster? Well, can I work with LACP? What if I have standalone host in my inventory? Those types of questions, go to the documentation and you'll find answers to many of those there. When it comes to the ARIA suite and upgrading to VCF9, there are some additional considerations you want to take into account. So if you are running the ARIA suite lifecycle, you will need to update that to LCM version 8.18 patch 2 or higher. The patch 2 essentially brings the VCF9 awareness. So in order to use the ARIA suite lifecycle manager to deploy or to upgrade operations to version 9 and to deploy the fleet manager, you have to be able to import the 9.0 binaries, and it has to be aware of those. And that's what that patch 2 is doing. So of course, a subsequent patch would also include that logic as well. And you also need to update the operations to VCF9. So those are typically manual steps that will be done as a prerequisite. You can import and update the other ARIA components, as I've mentioned. And again, as I mentioned, there is no upgrade from ARIA logs to VCF logs. And also keep in mind the VIDM, which is used primarily for identity management for automation, is replaced with a new component called the VCF Identity Broker in VCF9. When you do the upgrade, it will continue to use VIDM, and there will be no changes from that regard, and you'll continue to have the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager continue to manage the VIDM, but you will need to look long-term at a strategy for how to migrate over to the VIDB. If you're doing a new greenfield deployment, of course, it will start with the VIDB. All right. Some of the notable limitations. So today we're at VCF 9.0, and right now we have a limitation where if you have a vCenter server that is currently registered with a vCenter server that's currently registered with NSX, we don't yet have a way to converge that or upgrade that to a VCF9 management domain yet. That's something that you can expect to see soon. It's on the roadmap. This is a temporary limitation, but just be aware of that. So if you are in this category, you have a vCenter server with NSX, the message here is stay tuned and watch for a future update. We already talked briefly about the enhanced link mode and the need to break that as enhanced link mode is deprecated. And if you're a VxRail environment, the same message as with NSX, stay tuned. Right now, we don't yet have an upgrade path for VxRail environments. That is something that is being worked with Dell and is something we are working toward as well. So just a couple of notable limitations there. All right, so let me just do a quick time check. So we're about 30 minutes in. I'm going to go through a couple upgrade scenarios and then hopefully get to the demo. So let me just kind of check some of the questions here. I know there's several of them coming in. By ARIA logs, do you mean ARIA operations for logs, please? Yeah, so ARIA logs is the old name, and then we rebranded and we named it VCF logs. But basically, it's I'm trying to, the original name left me, but login site. It's the login site. It's gone through a couple of iterations, but yes, by logs, we're referring to the ARIA logs. Let's see. Okay, let me just go ahead and press on with the presentation, and then I want to make sure we have time to get to at least a little bit of the demo to see that. All right, so here are some of the high-level paths to VCF9. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but my intent is to kind of just show at a high level and just the process to go through, and then I will also yeah, let's just do that. So here, what you'll see here is I have 3 scenarios we're going to go through. So the first scenario, I have a vSphere environment with no ARIA suite components. Then I have a vSphere environment with ARIA operations and a vSphere environment with the ARIA LCM and operations. So just kind of mimicking the flow chart I had here. I had the 3 scenarios, and down here below I have kind of a overview of what that upgrade path will look like. And so here you see here there's the 6 basic steps we'll go through. And so we'll start here. Step 1 is we'll go in and transition to VLCM images if we haven't already done that. If we've already done that, we can skip that step. We will then upgrade vSphere to vSphere, upgrade our vSphere environment to vSphere9. So that will start by going in, upgrading our vCenter server, and then going and upgrading our ESX host. And then after we've done that, we will download the VCF installer and deploy it into the environment. And then we will go into the VCF installer, set up a depot, and download the binaries, the VCF9 binaries. And then once that's done, we shift over to the VCF installer. And you'll see here, all these steps are labeled as one big step because this is all done by the VCF installer. So we'll go into VCF installer, we'll use the deployment wizard and walk us through the process of converging that existing vCenter. And when you see the word converge, that basically means take an existing vCenter instance and bring it in and make it our VCF management domain. After we converge the vCenter, we will deploy ops and the collector. We will then deploy the fleet management, and we'll do all the configuration for you. It will then deploy an instance of NSX manager, configure the SDDC manager, and optionally deploy an instance of VCF automation. And then once that's done, you'll relicense the environment. At that point, your upgrade is primarily complete. So you're essentially done, and then you can move on to any post-upgrade activities, such as deploying logs or deploying an external VIDB, configuring VCF SSO, enabling the vCenter linking mode to get that single pane of glass back, as well as deploying other components such as operations for network, HCX, etc. So that's kind of the probably one of the more simple upgrade scenarios, but a quick overview of what that process looks like. Now, as we mentioned, the upgrade path varies slightly if you have an instance of ARIA operations. So here you'll see we have an ARIA operation, so there's an extra step here. And that extra step is we start by upgrading from these ARIA operations 8.18 to VCF operations 9.0. Once we've done that, we will go ahead and just pick up where we left off before, where we'll transition to our VLCM images if we haven't already done that. And then you'll see it just looks the same process here. We'll upgrade vSphere, download the installer, download the binaries, and then we use the installer. Now here, the VCF installer, because we have an existing operations, it will converge both the vCenter and the operations. It will then deploy the fleet management and the collector and configure those components, then deploy NSX, configure the SDC manager, and optionally deploy VCF automation. We relicense the environment, move on to those post-upgrade activities. All right, and then we get into the last example here, and this is where we have the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager and with ARIA operations. And keep in mind, we could also have ARIA automation and other components. I'm just trying to keep this simple. So I'm not saying that you have to be limited to just ARIA operations. If the other components are there, they can be there. They will continue to be managed by the ARIA LCM until such time as they're imported into the fleet management. But here you'll see the upgrade path again is slightly different with one extra step. That is, we're first going to go in and patch the ARIA LCM to bring in that VCF9 awareness. We will then use the ARIA LCM to upgrade ops. And here, instead of letting the installer deploy the fleet manager, the ARIA LCM will go ahead and deploy the fleet management as well. So we'll do that here. We then go in, transition to VLCM images, upgrade our vSphere environment. I left this step out on the other ones, but anytime you upgrade vSphere, remember that the vSAN, if you're using vSAN, that the vSAN disk have a corresponding disk version, and the VDS switches have a corresponding version as well. So anytime you upgrade vSphere, remember to go in and upgrade the vSAN disk version and the VDS version. These are pretty simple updates. They're metadata updates. They don't go in and change any of the data or any configuration. They can be done online. They're non-disruptive. But once you do this, you keep in mind that you're moving forward. So you want to make sure that everything in your environment is compatible with the newer version before you make that change. We just see a lot of customers where we go in and we're helping them with upgrades, and we see that they're still running VDS version 7, and they've upgraded 2 or 3 times, and they just forget about these things. So this is just more of a. I could have put this on all the other examples as well, but I neglected to do that. But anyways, just keep that in mind that there's that additional step there. And then you'll deploy the installer, download the binaries, and then use the VCF installer. And here, the VCF installer will both converge the vCenter and the operations, which was taken care of by ARIA LCM, deploy the collector, and then basically same process. And then when you're done, you relicense and move on to those post-upgrade activities. Okay, so that is the vSphere environment. If we were in a room and I could see everybody, I would ask everybody to show me by raise of hands who's running vSphere versus who's running VCF, and I would expect that there's probably 80-90% of us would be running vSphere, and maybe about 10 to 20% of us would be running VCF. So we do want to go over both scenarios. So I'm going to take the next few minutes and go over the VCF to VCF9 upgrade path and show you what that will look like. So from a high level, as far as prerequisites, you will need to be running VCF version 5.0 or above. And keep in mind, we do support both sequential and skip level upgrades. So if you're running 5.0, you can go right to VCF9. You don't have to go to 5.1, then to 5.2, then to VCF9, but you could do that. So we both support both the sequential and the skip level upgrade. Here again, you'll need to transition to VLCM images. The process to transition to VLCM images is a little bit different under VCF. We do have a PowerShell script to help you do that, as well as you can use the API. But because the SDC manager has a setting where it keeps track of what you're using for the workload domains, you need to update the SDC manager after you upgrade the vSphere. So there's a little bit different step, hence the PowerShell script or the need to use the API. For more information on that, see the docs. Here, if you are running the ARIA suite, you want to take care of that upgrade first. And then here again, there will be additional components deployed. Again, which components get deployed will depending on which ones you have as you go forward. But here's an example of some of those additional components that will come in. As far as your considerations, you'll always start with the management domain, so you want to upgrade it first. Keep in mind that you can manage vSphere 8, 5.5, and VCF 5.2 domains from a VCF 9 management domain. So when you upgrade your management domain, you don't have to upgrade everything at once. You'll start with the management domain. That will instantiate your VCF fleet. And then once you have your VCF fleet instantiated, with that management domain updated, then you can go in and update the other domains over time. But you do have the ability to continue to manage and visibility into those older versions of domains. All right, the upgrade path again is going to vary depending on the components that are already installed. We're going to go through that, and you will need to relicense when we're done. Okay, so the big notable limitation here is, again, if it's VxRail environment, we are still working on that upgrade path, so stay tuned. Most of the limitations are things that we expect to be able to resolve shortly with future updates and partnership with our partners. All right, so let's go ahead now and let's just go through the same process for VCF that we just went through for vSphere. We're going to go through 3 scenarios. Again, scenario 1 is no ARIA components. Scenario 2, we have ARIA operations, and scenario 3, we have ARIA operations that is being managed by ARIA LCM. And let's just go through the high-level flow here to see what that looks like. So we're going to start here with an example where we have VCF 5.2. So here I'm just going to start, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to upgrade my I'm going to download the SDC Manager update the SDC Manager. And then once I've upgraded the SDC Manager, I can go in and I can then download the NSX, vCenter, and ESX binaries. You'll notice here that I'm calling these binaries and not bundles. So if you're a VCF customer, you'll be familiar with the concept of a bundle. In previous versions of Cloud Foundation, we would take the binaries, we'd package them into bundles and make the bundles available to the SDC Manager. With VCF9, we're no longer doing that. So now when you upgrade to VCF, to the SDC Manager to version 9, it'll go out and it will download the binaries directly. So we no longer have that issue of having to the extra step to package binaries into bundles as much as we just take the binaries. So you update the SDC Manager, you get the latest binaries for upgrading NSX, vCenter, ESX, and then you go through, you'll upgrade NSX, you'll upgrade vCenter, and you'll upgrade your ESX host. Keep in mind, we'll need to convert to VLCM images prior to upgrading those ESX hosts here. Okay, then once that's done, we're going to go into vSphere. We're going to take care of our VDS version and our vSandisk version, and then we're going to go in and manually deploy ops. Remember, we don't have ops in this example, so we'll manually deploy ops, and then we'll manually deploy the fleet manager. And then once that's done, we'll go in and we'll register ops with the fleet management. We'll add ops as a deployment target in fleet management and download, and then we'll go into the fleet manager depot where we'll download binaries and updates where we can then go in and deploy the operations collector. I have this step here about updating the operations certificate. This is in the documentation, so you can look at the documentation, get additional details on this. But essentially what happens is when you manually download operations, it doesn't have the private key for the fleet manager in the certificate. And so once you've registered with the fleet manager, you then go in and use VCF operations to update the certificate. It gives you that private key. And then you need that in order to let the fleet manager deploy the operations collector. So that's kind of what that step's about. And then you can obviously go and deploy automation, and then we'll relicense the environment. And then you're at the same state as we've seen in the other examples. And again, you could, move this VCF operations up here to the beginning, and you could basically go through and deploy the operations, the fleet manager, and do a lot of this and then upgrade the SDC manager. So the order is not set in stone here. You go into the documentation, follow the docs, and just be aware though that this is the high level overview of the steps that need to be followed, not necessarily the exact order that they need to be followed. Okay, now we're getting to the second example where this time I have a standalone instance of ARIA operations. So here again, we start with ARIA operations by doing the upgrade, and then after the upgrade, we deploy the fleet manager. Okay. We then register the fleet manager with operations, and that's done inside operations. So here you're deploying the OVAs, and we go to operations where we do the registration, and then we use the SDC manager to perform the upgrade. It's the same upgrade path that we've seen before, very familiar for anybody who's upgraded VCF in the past. Update the SDC manager. Here again, we download the binaries, and then we upgrade NSX, vCenter, NESX, and we'll build an upgrade plan and let the SDC manager guide us through this process. Take care of our VDS and vSAN versions, and then we go in and complete our configuration of the operations and the operations fleet manager, update our certificate, deploy the collector, and then deploy automation. So we get to the same end state here. Now, in the case that we do have, looks like I got ahead of myself. Let me just kind of catch up here. The slides, I apologize. Okay, so here we'll get to our last example. And so in this example, we have the RELCM. So here again, just as we've seen in the vSphere example, we'll start by first patching the RELCM to patch 2, and then we'll use the RELCM to then deploy operations and fleet management. Okay, once that's done, we use the SDC manager to upgrade our management domain. So upgrade both the SDC manager and the management domain. And then we go in, upgrade our VDS and vSAN versions, and then we'll go in and complete the configuration and operations where we replace the certificate, download the binaries, deploy the collector. And then here, in this example, a little bit different because I do have an instance of ARIA automation running. So I'm just kind of showing here that if you do have an existing instance of ARIA automation, you can import that to the operations fleet management and upgrade it. And that would be done from VCF operations 9.0. So in addition to being able to deploy automation, you can import and upgrade automation from VCF operations 9.0 as well. And then we'll relicense the environment and go through and do the post-upgrade activities. Okay, so it looks like we got through most of the questions. Sorry, I got off on my order in the slides there. So now, before we wrap up, let's go ahead, and I do have a demo, and I'm just going to go through and show kind of this process from a demo standpoint. So let's kind of just go ahead and jump into that. So this is the demo, and I'm just going to go ahead and talk through it. This is a pre-recorded demo. Obviously, it takes a fair bit of time to do the upgrade. More time than we have here. And I'm just going to take one example. In this example, I'm going to take a vSphere customer running with ARIA LCM and ARIA operations. And we're going to basically walk through this process of completing the upgrade. Okay. So because we have the ARIA LCM, we know we start by first applying a patch. So in order to do that, here we come to the ARIA LCM. Notice that I have, in this example, logs and operations deployed. Operations is running version 8.18. And if I come up here, look at my ARIA Suite lifecycle, and I go to the version, you can see that this is running version 8.18, and we do need that patch 2. So to do the patch 2, I need to make sure I download the patch 2 binaries, and I do that in binary mapping. Once those are done, I come into System Patches, and I just basically do a new patch. Here I see the patch is available. And again, this has been uploaded to the ARIA LCM. and imported using the binary management. So those are steps we kind of skipped over here, but we see the patches available, and then we'll go ahead and install it. Okay, it kicks off this little workflow. This workflow will run. Note that it will automatically reboot when you do this. That caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting to reboot following a patch, but it did reboot. After the reboot, I'm able to then come back in and log in, and everything looks good. I come down here to About, and I can see, yep, I am now running patch 2. So now I have the VCF awareness, and I can now use the RELCM in order to patch my operations. So to do that, I'll come into Lifecycle, I'll come into my environment. Here I have a simple environment. Again, we can see that I have my logs 8.18 and my operations 8.18. And here I have my upgrade where I can do the upgrade. Now, prior to doing this upgrade, I do need to come in here to settings under binary management, and there's two binaries that I'm going to need to upload. I'm going to need to upload the VCF operations 9.0 upgrade binaries, as well as the OVA template for the VCF fleet manager. So I've uploaded both of those. And so I'll go in here now and do the upgrade, and I'll go ahead and proceed. Here you'll see it's basically, it knows because of the binaries I've uploaded what my target version is, and it's pre-populated the URL, which is where I've uploaded this upgrade package. And I'll go through and it's basically saying, okay, hey, you're going to deploy a new instance of the fleet management. Which type of licensing are you using? Are you using VCF or VVF? Depending on the type of licensing, on which features will get enabled. And I'll go ahead and choose VCF, and then it will run a very quick assessment just to make sure everything's in good shape. The assessment completes, we can view the report. Here we're going to go ahead and just proceed with the update. When you do update the operations, it will basically take the operations cluster offline, and we have an option here to take a snapshot. And if we so choose, we can retain the snapshot. Here we'll take the snapshot, but we'll let it delete the snapshot after the upgrade is complete. Now, as I mentioned, we are going to deploy an instance of the fleet management appliance as part of this upgrade. So here it's asking me for my vCenter information to include, the network, the data store. This is where it's going to deploy the fleet manager appliance. And here is the name of the fleet manager appliance, the URL and the IP address, and I assign an admin and root password. I'll go ahead and click next. And then it asks me for my networking information. So we'll put in our domain name, we'll validate our DNS and TP, and then we'll provide our gateway and netmask. Okay, at this point, we've provided all the inputs, so we'll do a pre-check. And this is a pretty extensive pre-check. It takes like 3-4 minutes to run. You want to make sure everything passes. I do have a warning here. We're going to ignore the warning. This is a byproduct of my lab environment, but you want to make sure your pre-check passes. That means the environment's healthy, ready to go with the upgrade. I think if I look at this, it's just basically telling me that it's basically complaining that about the sizing. It's basically saying, hey, you're a little undersized. And again, that's just kind of a byproduct of my lab. And so we'll go ahead and press on. We can review the details. And then when we're ready, click submit. And now we'll go out and do the upgrade. So you'll see the upgrade here is broken down to 13 stages. And we're going to kind of just jump through these real quick, but it will take the cluster offline, take a snapshot, do the upgrade, and then bring it back online. And then we jump forward up here to stage 11. It's going to deploy that fleet management. So if we come back over here to our vSphere, here we can see this fleet management being deployed and powered on. Now, if we come back here to our upgrade, we can see that the upgrade is now complete. All 13 stages have been completed. All right, now one thing here, so we've completed the upgrade, but now if I go back here to environments, you'll notice that in my Draper environment, I no longer see my operations instance. I see the logs instance, but I don't see operations. That's because as part of the upgrade, following the upgrade, with operations running 9.0 and the fleet management deployed, it was deregistered from ARIA and re-registered with the fleet management. Okay. And notice that the ARIA LCM continues to run in the environment, and it continues to use to manage my ARIA operations for logs and any other components. So this will continue to be there in the environment until such time as you are ready to get rid of it. Okay, and so now we'll go ahead and we'll go into the fleet management. We'll go into the VCF operations here, and I'm going to go ahead and log in. And here you'll see I'm now running operations, and this is the 9.0 version of operations. So we confirm we have completed the upgrade. And you'll notice over here, we do have this new fleet management section, which we're gonna learn about next month, but we have the capabilities in here under fleet management. All right, so we have completed that. So now we need to come back, and the next step is to upgrade our vCenter server. And to do this, we're gonna, there's multiple ways to do this. What I did is I just went and downloaded the 9.0 ISO, and I just basically used it to perform the upgrade. Okay, the upgrade is a two-step upgrade. I'm not going to go through the details of how to upgrade vCenter. Many of you probably have done this more than I have, and you're probably more familiar with it. But essentially, we deploy a new appliance with a temporary IP address. This new appliance is deployed using the new version. We then copy the configuration from the source vCenter into the new target vCenter. And then when we're ready to make the switch over, we take a brief outage where we shut down, we bring over the IP addressing and the network identity, and then we bring up the new appliance with the new identity, and that completes the upgrade. And so here you can see we've completed that. We've copied the data, we set it up, and have brought it online. So that's the vCenter upgrade. Again, I'm not going to go through details on that, as that's something I'm guessing many of you are familiar with, but you can see here when I log in, we are now running version 9.0. Okay. I have a 4-node cluster here, and so of course the vSphere upgrade is 2 parts. There's the vCenter part, and then there's the ESX host part. So here I come down to my cluster and I go to my updates, and we can see that we are currently running an image 8.0 update 2 with the build number. Now, because we're using VLCM images, I will need to go in and create a new image for the 9.0. And so to do that, I'm going to come over here, go into the Lifecycle Manager, and I'm going to go to Actions, where I'm going to import some updates. And here I have downloaded the 9.0 depot. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. And with that imported, I come over here, I can see I now have my 9.0 depot. So now I can go ahead and create a new image using that depot. So I'm going to create my ESX9 image, and I'm going to choose that image, that depot we just uploaded. I'm going to validate this, and once the validation is complete, I'm going to save it. So I have just created my new image. So now I got my new image. I'm going to come back here to the inventory. And so now I can come in here and I can edit my image. And in the dropdown, I can select the new image that I just created that's based on 9.0. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And the minute I save it, it's going to do a quick compliance check, and it's going to show me, hey, 4 hosts are not compliant, which we expect because the 4 hosts are not running 9.0. So now we need to remediate the cluster in order to bring it into compliance. So we'll go ahead and do a remediate all and start the remediation. And you'll see here that it's going to start, and it starts by basically taking the first host. We get a lot of questions about, hey, how do you determine which order? So it uses a DRS to identify which host to start with. In this example, started with host 3. It's going to basically take host 3, and it will basically put it into maintenance mode, and after it takes into maintenance mode, it will basically start the upgrade by installing the new image onto the host, and then it will reboot the host. When it reboots, it will disconnect for a brief period of time, then it will come back. When it comes back, we'll take it out of maintenance mode, and then we'll do a quick check, scan to make sure that the upgrade was complete, and then we'll move on to the next host, ESX2 in this example. Okay, and so we're going to jump forward here. We don't need to see that same process for all 4 hosts, but now we can see that if we look at the compliance, all hosts in this cluster are compliant, which means we basically repeated that same process for host 3, host 1, 2, and 4. So all 4 hosts are now upgraded and they are running version 9. Come back here to the summary, click on the host. We can confirm that we are running 9. Okay, so we have completed our operations upgrade. We deployed the fleet management. And then we also upgraded vCenter and upgraded our host. And so now we're ready to go in and deploy the VCF installer. So to do that, come up here to our cluster, go to Actions, and we'll go ahead and we will deploy the new OVF template, and we will go ahead and load up the VCF installer. Now, one thing, you look at this list of 9.0 binaries, you'll notice here, you don't see a VCF installer listed here. It's important, and this is an area that has confused a lot of customers as they've got started with VCF9. The VCF installer is a service that runs on the SDDC manager. So when you download the VCF installer, you would actually download the same OVA as the SDDC manager. So we're going to choose the SDDC manager OVA, and we're going to deploy that. And we're going to, when we name this, I'm going to name it SDDC Manager. I'm not going to name it VCF Installer. That's because when we do the convergence, it's going to basically reconfigure the installer to become the SDDC Manager. So you got to keep in mind the personality of the VCF Installer will change as part of the upgrade. And so you want to name it with that end state in mind. Okay. So we'll go ahead and I'm just going to jump forward here. I simplified that, but now we have the SDDC Manager. The running, this is our VCF installer, and I'll go ahead and power it on. Okay. Now, like I said, the VCF installer is a service that runs on the same appliance as the SDDC Manager. So when you deploy an instance of the OVA, by default, it will run in what we call installer mode. And so I come up here and I'll just connect to it, and you'll see now I'm connected to the VCF installer. Log in as admin at local using a password that was assigned during the OVA deployment. And here we are, we're at the new VMware Cloud Foundation installer. Okay, and so now we're going to move on to the next step where we're going to download the binaries. Okay, so let me just kind of see the questions here. Looks like most of the questions have been answered, and we're doing pretty good on time. So we'll just go ahead and press on with the demo. Hopefully everybody's staying engaged here. Note that with the VCF installer, we have the concept of a depot. And so the first thing you do is you set up a depot. There are two types of depot. There's a connected depot and there's a disconnected depot, or what we call an offline depot. So if you're a disconnected side, a dark side, or you don't want to have your environments connected directly to the internet, that's fine. We do have support for the offline depot. When you set up an offline depot, we do have documentation on how to do this, but essentially what you do is you set up a local web server in your data center. You use the VCF download tool to download the binaries. And with the binaries, you'll need to download the metadata, and this is all done by the VCF download tool. And you'll copy these into that web server. And then you can come here when you click configure, you basically point the installer to that web server, and that will act as your offline depot. Okay, so a little bit of extra steps there, but that works, and that's the offline depot. For this demo, we're going to go ahead and use the online depot. And for the online depot, this is pretty slick because I just click configure. I simply provide my Broadcom software token and I authenticate. It uses the token to basically go out, authenticate to the depot. And once I'm authenticated, you'll see down here, it then lists all the available binaries that are available for me to download. And I go ahead, select those, and I will download those. Notice here, there's a VMware Cloud Foundation. The VCF installer can also be used to deploy VVF as well. And so if you're using a VVF environment, you can click this drop down and select VVF, and it will download the pertinent binaries for VVF as well. So now that we set up our depot, we deployed the installer, we set up our depot. Now we can use the deployment wizard to basically upgrade our vSphere environment or converge our vSphere environment to the new VCF fleet. So we'll go ahead and click on this, and this brings us to this screen, which is one of the where we identify the concept of a VCF fleet. So I haven't really spent a lot of time talking about the VCF float. I know I've mentioned it a few times, but it's very important that you have a good understanding of this concept of a VCF fleet. And you'll want to think about this from a perspective of both your starting state as well as where you expect to go over the next several months and even years with regards to how you plan to build out your private cloud. Essentially, with VCF9, we have what we call fleet level components, which are primarily operations and automation. Okay, and when you deploy a new VCF fleet, you're basically saying you're going to instantiate a new instance of operations and a new instance of automation. Now, when I say a new instance, that doesn't mean a net new deployment. That means, I can't take an existing operations and converge that into my fleet. I can take an existing automation and converge that to my fleet. But basically what you do is you're taking an operations instance, an automation instance. If it doesn't exist, you're going to deploy one. If it does exist, you're just going to use that, and you're going to basically instantiate this concept of a VCF fleet. Then behind the VCF fleet, you're going to deploy a VCF instance, which is going to be comprised of a management domain with one or more workload domains. And the management domain, of course, is where we have our vCenter, our NSX, our vSphere cluster, and our SDDC manager. Okay, so if you already have an existing VCF fleet, in other words, you already have an instance of operations and automation that's part of a VCF fleet, when you want to scale out and you want to deploy additional VCF instances, rather than have to deploy another instance of operations automation, you can choose this second button here to deploy a new VCF instance into an existing fleet. So when you check this box, you're basically identifying whether or not you're going to use an existing instance of operations automation or whether you're going to set up a new fleet using a new instance of operations and automation. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do a new fleet. And so we'll go ahead and do that. And when you get into discussion about fleet, we have several examples. Our solution architecture team has done a lot of work around kind of providing guidance around how many fleets you should have, how many VCF instances per fleet, whether it's going to be across region, whether you're going to implement some type of high availability, business continuity, disaster recovery. This all ties into this. So again, this is why you want to really make sure you understand this fleet concept and you architect and have a good idea of how you plan to scale out using this new fleet concept before you start getting into your upgrades, as that could eventually protect how you approach this. Okay, so with that, now we come in and say, okay, when I deploy VCF, I can either do net new or a greenfield, or I can basically take existing components. Well, we're doing an upgrade, so we're using existing components. And we have an existing VCF operations, which we have upgraded to VCF operations 9.0, and we did that using the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager. And then we have an existing vCenter server, which we have upgraded. And as I alluded to earlier, currently, we don't yet have the ability to bring in an existing vCenter that's registered with NSX. Watch for updates, watch for release notes when that limitation will go away. So we're in this example, we don't have the NSX, so we're good to go. And then we'll start by basically going in and providing information about our VCF instance. Okay, now I talked earlier about this concept of simple versus a high availability deployment model. Here you see that where you make that decision. So if I choose simple, that means I'm going to deploy a single instance of the NSX manager, single instance of operations, which in this case is already deployed. And if I deploy automation, I'll deploy a single instance of automation. If I choose high availability, it will deploy 3 instances of each of those components. And so the high availability gives you a higher degree of availability because you're using in-product clustering to improve availability as well as scalability. But keep in mind, regardless of which model you choose, vSphere HA is in place and will provide a pretty good level of availability. So we're going to provide the version name, give the VS instance name, give the VCF instance a name, give the manager domain a name, choose our deployment model. You can optionally choose to have it auto-generate the passwords. I don't do that because I have, muscle memory password that I use in all my labs, so I do that. And then whether you want to enable the customer experience program. Okay, with that done, because we are bringing in an existing VCF operations, instead of asking me for information on how to deploy VCF operations, it's simply asking me for the information so that I can log in to the VCF operations. So I provide those details, I connect. It says, okay, here's the thumbprint, make sure you got the right one. Confirm that. And it says, okay, hey, you of an existing operations, we've seen that the existing operations is already registered with an instance of the fleet manager, so provide that password. And then in addition to this, we're going to deploy a new component called the operations collector appliance. So please provide those details. So it's going to deploy a new instance of the operations collector appliance. And then we'll go ahead and go on to the next step. And because we have the fleet manager, we need to acknowledge that certificate thumbprint as well. Okay. Here we're going to deploy an instance of VCF automation, so we provide those details. Because we're only doing the simple deployment model, it's only going to deploy one instance of the of the automation. So we only have to provide one IP address. The second IP address is used for future updates and maintenance. But so we have that single node there. Note the checkbox here. If I wanted to skip the VCF automation at this time and deploy it later as a day 2 operation using the fleet management feature inside of operations, I could select this checkbox and do that later. We're going to go ahead and deploy this now as part of the upgrade. Okay. And then because we have an existing vCenter that's already been upgraded to version 9, we simply provide the vCenter credentials along with the SSO login credentials. And here again, we need to validate that we got the right one by accepting the certificate thumbprint. And then here we're going to deploy NSX. Now, so because we're doing a simple deployment model, we only have a single NSX manager node, and we provide the passwords. Now here, we do have an option here where we can optionally choose to configure the NSX overlay on top of the ESX management network. So this is basically just a way to make it easier to get started with virtual networking. You can always go into the NSX manager post-deployment and change this. So if you don't want to do this, you could toggle this off and it will just do VLAN backed networking. If you want to go ahead and do this, you can toggle this on and then you can go in NSX Manager and change that at a future point in time. So we're going to go ahead and leave it on and go ahead and proceed. Okay. Now, remember, I spent a little bit of time talking about how the VCF installer is a service that runs on the SDDC manager, and hence the kind of the awkward naming here, as we're calling the VCF installer the SDDC manager. And here you see this blue box here. This blue box is basically a couple sentences to explain what I was trying to explain. But essentially it's saying that the Cloud Foundation installers is deployed. If it's deployed on one of the hosts that's going to be converted into the manager domain, during the deployment process, it will be converted to the SDC manager appliance. So because we already have the appliance deployed and we're using it as the installer, you'll see up here on the URL, I'm connected to the SDC manager. It's going to take this instance of the installer and it's going to flip it over to SDDC manager mode. So basically it's saying, hey, just let me log into this existing appliance. It's going to ask for the password to make sure I get the right appliance, and I'll reconfigure that. So then we'll go in here and now we can review our configuration. So here we can go through and I can see all the configuration details. Note that in addition to viewing this in kind of a plain text format, I can also review this in a JSON format, and I can also download the JSON spec. So if you have, if any of you are in a situation where maybe you want to deploy several VCF fleets, and maybe you want to deploy with different configurations, rather than have to step through this UI and go through and provide all these inputs each time you do this, you can save the JSON spec. Go in, edit JSON spec using a text editor, and then when you come in, you can just import it into the VCF installer, and it will auto-populate all the fields. You can also pass it using an API. So the common option used by a lot of customers, especially those customers who do a lot of deployments for various reasons. So with that, we'll go ahead and proceed. It will go ahead and do an extensive validation. In reality, this validation takes probably about 10 minutes or so, 7 to 10 minutes. And you want to make sure that the validations are complete. Getting back to one of those recommendations I made early on is that when you do the validations, you want to be careful about ignoring warnings and errors, because those things typically will come back to bite you. Now here you'll see I do have a couple of warnings, and because I have the warnings and because I had that recommendation, I just want to take a minute and explain why I'm seeing these warnings. This was recorded using a pre-GA version, and at that time it was not able to go out and validate the 9.0 because 9.0 wasn't publicly released yet. So it's basically telling me a warning that I can't check compatibility. I know I can ignore that because of the situation. Here I have a warning telling me that, hey, you have some standard switches that are in use by your host. So this is not a problem. It's more of a recommendation, and you do have that requirement for a VDS. But again, this is something I know that I can ignore. And so I do have these two warnings, and I understand what they're about. I know that I can ignore them. So I'll go ahead and just kind of acknowledge these. And then when I acknowledge them, then I get the option to proceed with my deployment. If I had some errors or I had some other issues, I can go in, troubleshoot, and if I can resolve the issue, I can come back, rerun the validation, and make sure I get a good validation before I proceed. Go ahead and click deploy, and here you'll see the VCF installer then proceeds to deploy. Depending on your environment, this can take anywhere from 90 minutes to upwards of 4 hours. And the reason for that wide range is because whether or not you're deploying in simple mode or HA mode, what type of storage you're using, how long it takes to deploy OVA templates, how long it takes to configure all the components, all those kind of factor in. And so just keep that in mind. But here you'll see we're done. If I go in and we look, we can see a summary of all the tasks that were performed. In addition, I have this history of all the tasks that were performed. This is a good audit trail that I can use to go in and say, hey, what happened? If for some reason there should be a failure, it would tell me here where it failed. I can use this to then troubleshoot the problem and identify the problem. And if I can fix it, I can come back here and restart the workflow. So a little bit of resilience built into the VCF installer. Now here you'll see we're done. We basically converted the existing vCenter into a new VCF instance. We deployed NSX. We configured the SDC Manager appliance. And again, we didn't deploy it. We reconfigured it because it was already deployed. That was the same thing as the installer. We joined the fleet management and the operations appliance instance, and then we basically deployed the automation appliance. So now I can go ahead and jump out to VCF operations where I can log in. And when you log in, you'll see my VCF instance is configured as a cloud account. It's always good to go into, the administration section here. Let me see where, I guess I skipped that in this demo. But here in the inventory, you can see I have my management vCenter server listed as part of my VCF domain account, and it's all been configured for me. Coming back here to my vCenter, instance. Let me log in. I just want to show you the inventory here that you see. So this is, we talked about how new components will get deployed. So in this example, I had 4 VMs running. Those were left unaffected. I have my VCF ops and my VCF logs. Ops has been upgraded to 9. Logs is still running 8.18, and it's still managed by the RELCM. I have my new fleet manager that was deployed. I have my NSX manager. And then I also had this resource pool, and it's moved several components into this resource pool. My SDDC manager, my management vCenter, the ops collector, and the automation. And so this is my new VCF management domain. Okay, and so if we come back to the slides here, and we come back to that specific scenario that we just went through, actually, I guess that was it. So this is what we essentially just went through in this demo. So I just basically walked you through the steps of actually this is the vSphere environment. So let me come back here to this example here. So this is essentially what we just walked through. And so right now we have just completed that step. And so the next step would be to license VCF. I wasn't able to capture that in that demo, but the next step would be to go in and license VCF9 and then perform any post-upgrade activities. So with that, I've been talking for a while, and I know Amit had to leave. So let me just kind of go through and see what additional questions we have, if there's anything I can answer in the few minutes we have left, and feel free to post additional questions if you have any outstanding questions. Regarding licensing in VCF9, I have more space in vSAN than VCF cores cover, so I have several vSAN add-ons. How does this work in the new licensing model? Okay, so in terms of licensing and the business services console and how you manage your entitlement, unfortunately, I don't have any access to that. Access to the business services console is tied to a customer login. It's tied to a customer site ID, and as employees, we don't have access to that. So in terms of how you would finagle that, I'm not sure, but if you work with your TAM, I'm sure they can probably work with the pricing and packaging people to figure out how to either consolidate those keys or to get things done. But one thing to keep in mind is with VCF9, you go into the business services console and you create a license file. There's one license file. And in this license file, it has all your entitlement. And from the business services console, you basically allocate from your allowed licenses to the different VCF operations instances and assign license files. You download that one license file, and that one license file is used to license your environment. And you'll license both the core components, the vSphere, the NSX, the ESX, as well as the add-ons. In this case, vSAN would be an add-on. And so it's very simple to do. You don't have to worry about a bunch of keys and stuff. So it should be a simpler process. As far as the details on how to do that, unfortunately, I'm not the best person to help. Yes, depending on your environment and depending on what versions you're running, you will want to tailor the upgrade that I have been discussing. You'll want to tailor that for your environment. What I'm showing is kind of the common scenarios and the high level, and so there should be very similar. But again, depending on what versions you're running and what components you're running, your path could vary slightly. Is there a demo available for upgrading environments that are only using vSphere and ESXi? I don't have a I don't have a current demo similar to what I just went through, but you can just basically chop off the ends of the demo I just went through and see this experience. This is something I am working on and I plan to make available in the next month or so. This was one of the things on my to-do list following VM Explorer was to go in and to capture the demos for each of these upgrade scenarios and make those available. So right now I'm working on the 2 scenarios, and for those 2 scenarios, I do include the RELCM with the RE operations, and then the others will follow. So that could become something that's available over time, but it's not currently available. But if you go into these demos, you can kind of see where you can just kind of cut off the ends of the demo and kind of see what that experience would be like. Okay, so when it comes to rollback and restore options, so what happens if I'm in the middle of an upgrade and something goes bad and I find myself in this kind of situation where I'm half upgraded? How do I recover? What's my rollback options? So as you go through and you look at the the way I've broke these slides out, you'll see I've broken it out into kind of steps. You know, I go into the ARIA LCM and do some things. I go to vSphere and do some things. I go to the VCF installer and do some things. And so any one of these points I could break. But essentially what you'll do is, you know, when you go in, you'll want to address, you know, steps 1 and 2 from the RELCM. Obviously, if step 1 breaks, you'll want to troubleshoot, resolve that before you go to step 2. But when you get into like the VCF installer step here at the end, whoops, I didn't mean to transition that slide. Let me go back. When you get into this VCF installer slide here at the end, remember that audit trail I showed you where I showed you after the install all the summary of all the tasks that were performed? You can go in and use that to basically identify what went wrong. And you can basically identify, was it an issue with detecting a vSAN disk, or was it an issue with the VDS and it couldn't migrate some networking over to the VDS? You can go in and identify that, and you can use that information to try and troubleshoot it. If you're able to troubleshoot, you can just pick up right where you left off. If you're and you can engage with support to help you identify and isolate. We have a pretty extensive pre-checks. Those pre-checks are meant to try and avoid getting the situations where you might need to roll back. We provide pretty detailed logging and information available both in the logs and in the UI to help you to be able to identify. And we do have this ability to kind of pick up where you left off. Worst case scenario, of course, the standard answer of make sure you have your backups, make sure you have recent backups in place prior to attempting this. As you know, the ultimate worst case scenario would be to have to recover a component from a backup. Very unlikely, but again, that's kind of the situation. But yeah, we don't have a simple like rollback option or anything like that at this time. Looks like somebody posted some information about VxRail and the release pass there. So I don't know if there's been some new announcements around this, but yeah, do check with your Dell counterparts on upgrade to VCF9 and follow their direction on how to upgrade that. Can we import a VDI workload domain with VVF licenses into an existing VCF instance? Okay, so this is a two-part question. There's a technical part, and then there's a licensing part of the question. So from if you bring a vCenter into VCF, that vCenter will need to be licensed as VCF. So from a licensing standpoint, you cannot mix VVF and VCF licenses. You can run VVF and VCF side by side, and you can have them part of the same VCF operations instance, but you can't bring a VVF instance into a VCF fleet as part of a workload domain unless you have a VCF license. So, I know it's kind of a choppy answer there, but the short answer is you can import VVF into VCF and make a VVF instance a workload domain. But when you do that, you will need to install NSX and license that for VCF. If you want to keep the VVF separate and you don't want to have to use a VCF license, then you will have to run it as a separate VVF instance outside of the VCF fleet. And again, excuse me, you can manage both those from a single instance of VCF operations as well. If we have several unlinked vCenters, let me do a quick time check. If we have several unlinked vCenters, do we have to deploy one instance of NSX and operations by vCenter? So if you have several vCenter servers, you can share an NSX instance across them. Keep in mind that in VCF, you have the concept of a management domain and you have the concept of workload domains. You will have an NSX instance associated with the management domain, and that NSX instance is not able to be shared with other workload domains. So for the manager domain, it has to be dedicated, but when you create your workload domains, you can basically instantiate NSX with the first workload domain, and then when you deploy the second, third, and subsequent workload domains, they can join that existing NSX fabric. So you can share NSX fabrics across workload domains. You will need to have at least 2 fabrics, one for the management and one for your first VI workload domain. So if NSX is a requirement for VCF9, which it is having alternate solutions like something from Cisco an issue? No. Keep in mind that when we say NSX is required, It must be deployed. You must have an NSX manager. However, there's no requirement for you to go in and to adopt virtual networking. There's no requirement for you to go in and change your VDSs, change your DVPGs. You don't have to change any of your networking. You will have to install the NSX manager, but there's no requirement for you to change your networking. And so as such, if you're running existing networking solutions with third parties, most likely they'll be able to run in parallel, and you can basically just then run them side by side. With that said, just keep in mind that going forward, as you start to see new features and capabilities available in Cloud Foundation, such as VPCs and some of the new things we're doing around Kubernetes and the vSphere Kubernetes service inside of Cloud Foundation. Many of those capabilities will have dependencies on NSX, and so you'll need to use NSX to access those capabilities. But in terms of going in and disrupting or making any changes to any existing workloads, it's really non-intrusive. So hopefully that helps. So the demo appears straightforward if you have one vCenter. How does it work if I have two or more vCenters that were in link mode? So as I mentioned before, right now with VCF 9.0, one of the prerequisites for doing the upgrade is you have to break the link mode. So if you have them in link mode, you'll have to take them out of link mode. And also, this gets into that understanding of the fleet concept. Remember, we talked about a VCF fleet, and you take your first vCenter and you convert it into a VCF management domain that instantiates your VCF fleet. You can then take the second and subsequent vCenters and import those as workload domains, and the import is done from VCF operations. And you do not have to upgrade those to 9.0. I can bring in a workload domain that's running 8.x and bring that in. Also, I can bring in workload domain running 8.x that has NSX. And so, so it's pretty straightforward. But again, important point here is understand the fleet concept, understand that what I showed in the demo is instantiating a new VCF9 fleet, and understand the difference between instantiating a fleet and upgrading to a fleet versus importing a domain and basically adding vCenters to a VCF fleet. Kind of two different capabilities that you have there. And so if you have two or more vCenter servers, you take one, make it your management domain, take the other, import it as a workload domain, and go forward. And today with VCF9, you will need to take them out of link. If you have an environment that has more than one ARIA automation instance, this is where you're going to want to rely on your TAM. And you'll basically want to sit down and think about, okay, what is our strategy going forward? What are these different automation instances doing? Are they separate automation instances, one for like test and dev, or are they two different production instances? Do you want to try and run separate fleets and have the separate automation instances running as separate fleets? Or do you want to try and converge these automation instances into one automation instance, in which case, part of one VCF fleet. All options are on the table. All options are available. There is flexibility there, but again, this is where you'll want to sit down and really assess kind of what is your objective, where are you trying to go, and what is your end state, and that will kind of dictate on how you go forward. Okay, so almost to the end, a couple more questions. If you have several unlinked vCenters, do we have to deploy one instance of NSX operations? I think I may have already answered that one. So again, just kind of recap, just to make sure I got that. If you have several vCenters and you want to bring those in as separate workload domains within a VCF instance, you can share an NSX fabric across workload domains. However, when you take one of those vCenters and make it a management domain, the management domain requires a dedicated NSX fabric. So hopefully it helps. So for VCF operations and automation, how is DR handled for those fleet level components? Do we have to protect those separately with live site recovery? And the follow-on question, do the fleet components get deployed on NSX segments that are L2 stretched? Okay, so when it comes to providing business continuity, disaster recovery, if you go back and a little bit of a history lesson here, but we used to have something called the VMware Validated Designs, VVDs. And the VVDs were essentially prescriptive architectures tested and validated by VMware and extensively documented and published that essentially showed how to do just this thing, how to basically deploy a VCF instance with a highly available instance of operations and automation deployed in a way that could fail over between regions. Okay. The VVDs kind of evolved in something called the VVSs, and the VVSs still apply. So the VVSs are the documentation is still being tweaked and worked on, and so you may find that most of the documentation is still based on 5.2, but those concepts still apply. Now, with regards to deploying on NSX segments, in previous versions of Cloud Foundation, we had something called application virtual networks or AVNs, which are essentially a fancy way of saying NSX segment. And to facilitate the BCDR capabilities and the cross region and setting up disaster recovery, we did kind of recommend a topology where you deployed those on those virtual networks. However, that is purely optional, and in VCF9, it's even more so. You do not have to deploy on software-defined networks. You can deploy on VLANs. The flexibility is there for you. But the short way, I guess, to answer your question is we do have documentation and guidance on how to deploy a VCF fleet across dual regions in order to provide a level of business continuity disaster recovery. That is documented in the VCF9 documentation. You may have to go back to some of the 5.2 documentation, as not all the documentation is currently up to date yet. But that guidance is there and available. In addition to this discussion about handling DR activities, you're kind of dovetailing on the stretched clusters and the ability to deploy stretched clusters. Remember, stretched clusters is more of a data avoidance strategy, where disaster recovery is more of a reaction to a disaster, a recovery from a disaster. So we do have support for both vSAN stretched clusters, and you can also do metro clusters if you want to use something other than vSAN. And we do have support for business continuity disaster recovery. This is where you'll want to look for the VMware validated solutions and the guidance there. So again, flexibility is kind of the word of the moment here. All this is covered and supported. Obviously, I didn't get to it in the demo. My demo is very simple, but these are things you can definitely engage with your TAM and understand more. But when you do you follow the VVD or the VVS for disaster recovery for automation and auto operations, it is using a VLR with vSphere replication, and the components are deployed on software-defined networks in order to facilitate them. So a question about having multiple vCenters distributed globally and small clusters that often network connectivity issues. So here you're getting into situations where when you talk about when you have multiple vCenter instances that are distributed globally, you get into different possible situations. You can do remote clusters. There's different edge type topologies. We have a VCF edge SKU. And so it kind of depends on your use case and what situation you fall into. You can do something as simple as deploy a VCF in a consolidated architecture where you run compute workloads on the management domain and just deploy a small VCF instance or small VCF fleet at each location and have them be autonomous from each other. You could have them all be potentially part of the same operations and automation, again, depending on the network connectivity. So again, that flexibility word, there's options there. And so depending on your use case, your situation, how many, when you say multiple, how many, are we talking 5, 6? Are we talking 50, 60? That will affect how you architect that as well. And next week, when you guys talk about fleet management, that would be a good question for Jared Burns and the presenters there, as they will be able to talk a little bit more about these fleet level topologies and how to scale these across these environments where you have maybe spotty network connectivity or you have large numbers of remote sites. So ARIA automation tenants using LCM and the new VIDM still available. Okay, so getting into ARIA automation and the idea of tenants. When you go to 9, the VIDM is only used for the, it's kind of becomes legacy as we move to VIDM. But yes, you can continue to use ARIA automation together with the ARIA Suite Lifecycle and VIDM for your environments once you do the initial upgrade. ARIA LCM will still be there, VIDM will still be there. You can still use that. And then you could basically chart out your plan to move over to the new all apps org model and the new approach inside of VCF 9.0. So you can run those together. It's still available. I'm not really qualified to say much more than that, as I'm really not somebody who's got a lot of experience with ARIA automation. If you're using Site Recovery Manager, how does this impact the upgrade to VCF9? Well, obviously, if you're using Site Recovery Manager, you have multiple sites, and you're going to be doing some replication between those. So you'll need to coordinate all that. You'll need to basically figure out a sequencing, how you upgrade Site 1, how you upgrade Site 2, and then when you do the failover. So yeah, that's a good question. A little bit out of scope for what I can handle, just in terms of all the different caveats. Work with your TAM. You can engage professional services to help there as well. So a VCF instance is not a VM. No, a VCF instance is an instance of a VCF management domain plus one or more workload domains. And as you saw, when you do the simple deployment model, there's 7 VMs that make up a VCF instance. When you do the high availability deployment model, there's 13 VMs that make up an instance. And as you add workload domains, there will be additional VMs. So a VCF instance is a pretty big concept, and it entails many things. So it's correct, it is not a VM. So we are sizing our management plane. How many workload domains will it manage, or just how many components are deployed directly in the management plane? So we do have sizing guides. We do have sizing information. We're tending to move away from a number of workload domains. I think today in VCF9, the limit is still 25 workload domains. Keep in mind, behind those 25 workload domains, you can have many vSphere clusters. The focus is more about number of hosts in the environment and how you divide those hosts up. So we do have sizing information available with regards to sizing your environment. This ties into the discussion around fleet and how you can design your fleet. Or you can have one fleet, you can have multiple fleets. And keep in mind, there are multiple components. Not only do you have to think about scalability for your vCenter and your ESX host, but what is the scalability for NSX? What is the scalability for automation and operations? And take that into account. So yeah, there's a lot goes into sizing. It's a pretty loaded question there, and definitely the fact that you're thinking about it is a good sign. It's definitely something you want to think through as you go forward. All right, and so with that, we are at the bottom of the hour, and I think that's our 90 minutes. And so I will go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen to me for the last 90 minutes. I hope you found this useful. I hope it's been beneficial to you. And like I said, if you have any follow-up questions, they have several questions about the recording will be posted here shortly. And when that posting is available, I can make the demos available to you as well. Reach out to your TAMs, have your TAMs get in touch with us if you need more information or help with any additional questions. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it so much. It was a great session.
Thank you.